To tell, and we're just really honored to have an opportunity to talk to you. So thank you very much for spending time with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Proud to be here with you.
So can we just start with how you got involved in the industry, I think, and move on?
Way back in the mid-'50s, I started training with Alvin Roy in Baton Rouge. He had a club there, strength conditioning and a health club. And we had some unbelievable athletes in high school at that time. Myself, Billy Cannon, Heisman Trophy winner for LSU, Jimmy Taylor, Hall of Fame NFL, Green Bay Packer that scored the first touchdown in the first Super Bowl, Bob Pettit, one of the 50 all-time greatest players. So it was just one of those decades that may have been possibly the best decade of athletes to come out of Baton Rouge, and also athletes that went on to help LSU win the 1958 national championship. So that's how I got started with Alvin, and Alvin became my mentor. And when Alvin retired in 1978, he sold it to a group of businessmen, and he suggested to them that they get Gayle Hatch over there to handle the strength and conditioning. So I became the manager and the strength conditioning coach at Alvin's place on Oklahoma Street, and that was in 1978, and it's just continued over the years. We've made a couple of moves, but it's still, as far as I'm concerned, it's just an extension of what Alvin started.
Now, when you got involved in the strength conditioning industry, how predominant was it within athletic teams in general? Were there formal strength programs that were being used by teams at that point in time?
There really wasn't. It was taboo to train with weights when I first got involved with it. But Alvin Roy was in the Army, and Bob Hoffman and his world team were in Germany for the World Championships, and the Army assigned Alvin as a gopher. So whatever Coach Hoffman wants, you get it. And so he started seeing these amazing athletes doing the Olympic lifts, how fast, how explosive, how flexible they were. And he saw how different it was what people were doing back home with bodybuilding and slow movements. So when he moved back home to Baton Rouge, that's when he started it. I also was very fortunate at the time. Louis Rickey was going to LSU. He was an Olympian in U.S. Olympic weightlifting, and in 1964 he snatched a world's record. But he was very helpful to me too, with the Olympic lifts and learning the technical part of teaching the Olympic lifts.
So when you got involved, the idea of integrating Olympic lifts into, I guess, really any sport beyond just Olympic weightlifting really had not taken place yet.
That's right. Alvin would be the first one to start that. And then when I came along, I added just a little bit more than what Alvin had. And that's how we came up with the Hatch system that has been so successful today. So proud of my proteges. Of the 15 years of the BCS National Championship, proteges of mine using the Hatch system won 8 of them. And I think that's why I'm receiving this award, because that, along with my record in Olympic weightlifting, we were voted the #1 long-term most successful Olympic weightlifting team for USA weightlifting. Our team has won, junior and senior team won 54 national championships, 4 Olympians, and I was the head coach of the 2004 U.S. Olympic team that was held in Athens, Greece, which made it special because that was the home of the modern Olympics. Right.
So I know you've talked a little bit about the Hatch system. We were reading a little bit about it when we heard you were coming down today to talk to us. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the essence of that system, kind of what its foundational elements are?
Well, you got certain basic exercises like the jerk, the clean, the snatch. We do snatch pulls and clean pulls. We do front squats and back squats. We do snatch grip, full squats. Now we take those plus some assistant exercises from the Olympic list, combine that with some basic strength movement, add in a lot of plyometrics and jumping drills. You know, when I was playing, Alvin called them jumps. Now they call them plyometrics. You know?
It's a fancier name.
Fancier name, but it's the same thing. And then, of course, with the stretching and flexibility work, and it's also how you put them in the program. Somebody that just knows about the Olympic lifts, if he doesn't really know what he's doing and can teach it properly, he might be better off not having them in the program. But you got to know how to teach them properly. Then you got to know how to manipulate the volume and intensity over a 4-week cycle or a 6-week cycle. And so it gets more involved than what we've got time to talk about. But to name some of my top guys, I'd have to start off with number one, Tom Moffatt at LSU, he won 2 BCS national championships. I started working with Tommy when he was in high school. And then we've got Scott Cochran over at Alabama that now has won 3. People ask me about Scott being crazy on the sidelines, and I say, Scott was just as crazy when he was 13 as he is today. But I tell you what, it's his way of motivating, and when he gets in that weight room, he knows the X's and O's of the system. Then we have Vic Valorio at Florida State, who won the last BCS national championship. Johnny Long and John Stuckey at University of Tennessee, and Miami won a national championship. So total of 8 out of the 15 years that it was around. So I think that, combined with the success I've had in Olympic weightlifting, is why I'm receiving this award today.
Yeah, and I know when we had an opportunity to catch up just before we went online, I mean, the people that you've named are just fantastic individuals within, as themselves, in terms of really being in the industry for the right reasons, taking, pride in the athletes that they're developing men, or in women, who are good people themselves. And, that's something I'm sure they learned as a part of your philosophy.
Well, that's a big part of my philosophy. While we're trying to develop this athletic ability, we're also trying to teach them something about values and responsibilities, so that they can go up and be productive citizens and also give back to the sport and help the youth of America. And we have a saying in my program, hatcheroids, not steroids. And because we do not allow steroids, I've never had an athlete flunk a steroid test. And so we've got this environment. People can see 4 Olympians on the wall and 54 national championships. It shows what can be done without the use of performance-enhancing drugs. And so we're in 1990, I got the USA Weightlifting Committee to approve out of competition drug testing, whereas they could show up in my place and say, Matt Bruce, we're going to test you today without any warning. In the past, like the NFL, they'd give them a 6 weeks notice and then test them. Well, any idiot can get off 6 weeks ahead of time, but the NFL is doing better now, and so we're proud of that work that we've done, trying to combat but I don't let my lifters use steroids as a crutch. We're just going to be the best we can be, drug-free, and you don't hear us talking about, well, the Russians, the Bulgarians are on steroids. We don't let that doesn't. I'll fight that battle behind the scenes. The lifters fight the battle on the platform with me supervising them every workout.
So when you talked about some of the folks that you mentored, and the list goes on and on, when at some point these coaches that come and learn from you have to go off on their own and kind of build their own careers and right. Hopefully get head coaching positions at great at institutions. Right. What are some of the things that you, given all of the knowledge that you have and the experience you have, that you tell your proteges when they're leaving and going off to take that first opportunity to go and do it on their own and no longer be right underneath your wing?
Well, I want to say one thing. I want to go back and mention Paul Jackson's name at Ole Miss, who I think is an extremely outstanding young and up-and-coming strength coach. And the young man I started at 12, Joe Danos, who's now an assistant strength coach with the New York Giants. But the first thing and most important thing is teach him to stay in the eye of the storm. If I walk in any of those men's office right now that I named, and I see them in the office talking on the phone, trying to cut a vitamin sale deal, then they're going to get jumped on. I'm going to jump on them hard, because you got to be out in the eye of the storm, teaching, coaching, motivating, supervising every set. And that's how you develop these athletes. You get them to an elite level of strength, conditioning, and proper technique.
So, in the time you've been in the industry, the technology that's come into play in the industry has evolved a lot. I mean,
Right.
we've been walking around today talking to some technology companies and trying to get an understanding of what they're bringing to the industry. It sounds like your philosophy is a very hands-on philosophy.
Exactly right. And you know, I never knock another man's strength training program. If they want to learn about mine, they know where to find me. They can come see me and I will help them. But it doesn't matter if someone's using machines, a HIIT program, powerlifting, bodybuilding, whatever they think that may work, then I support them. I don't try to say, well, man, that's no good. I don't get involved in that stuff. I just do my program. I'm there to help if they want to find out more about mine. But there's a lot of great strength coaches out there that use other systems that have done very well, and I'm very proud of those people.
What are some of the things that you've done to evolve the Hatch system over time, or has it been a program that has been relatively similar over several decades? I know it's been extremely successful, but have there been things that you've kind of evolved within the system itself as you've learned about what works and what doesn't?
Well, that actually started back in 1970s with my first group of athletes. Back then, you didn't have all the material about the Russians and the Bulgarians where you can get. But I had a friend in New Orleans, civil engineer, that could translate the Russian training methods. So he would give these Russian training methods to me. I would get the Bulgarians, Eastern European, and I would experiment with them. And then I would take the best from what I see the Russians were doing, the Bulgarians, what Alvin and Louis Ricky gave to me and taught to me, put it together, experiment with it. It took about a decade before I could really come up with what we call the Hatch system. And then from then, there's been some minor changes, but pretty much the core has remained the same over all these years.
What was it about the Russian systems, for example, the Bulgarian systems, that we didn't have over here? Was just the fact that we had never been exposed to that training at all, or were we doing some of it, but they actually had some superior training methods that you realized as you looked into their system?
The only secret the Russians have is two things. Number one, the steroids, okay? Number two is they start out with 100,000 base of young athletes because they don't have a glory sport like football. I've had some great football players. I wear two hats, a strength conditioning coach and an Olympic weightlifting coach. And there's a lot of great lifters, potential lifters that I lost to college football and then into the pros that could have been great lifters. So Russia doesn't have football to compete with. Bulgaria doesn't have football to compete with. Olympic weightlifting is their main sport. And so that's a big plus to them. Yeah.
So they have, but what about the training methods themselves? Were those things that we had never really done before?
There could be a little bit of difference in what the Russians believe in and what the Bulgarians believe in. They have a little different philosophies. As far as one example is teaching technique. The Russians like to break down the lifts or the snatch and clean and jerk and teach it in parts, whereas the Bulgarians, as their scientists find, there's no sense in doing that, so they use what is called the holistic method by teaching the whole lift at one time. The Bulgarians will go with a higher intensity rate, more so than the Russians will, and they will do less number of exercises than the Russians. They concentrate more on the competitive lifts, where the Russians have a lot more assistant exercises in their program.
So when you translate those ideas into actually lifting for a sport like football, soccer, basketball,
Right.
Where does the Hatch system come? I guess how does the Hatch system take some of those ideas that are traditionally beneficial for an Olympic lifter,
Right.
and translate that into something that's beneficial for someone who plays a sport and they're doing Olympic lifts to support that?
Well, we've had so many great athletes over the year. One of my favorite, I started him in high school, is Warrick Dunn. Warrick Dunn was 5'8", 185 pounds, and at the end of his career, 12 years, he had gained over 10,000 yards rushing the ball and caught over 500 passes. And there's only 6 running backs in the history of the NFL that's ever done that. And so the difference is that you have to know how to manipulate the volume and intensity, and you have these assistant exercises that you may pull out one of the core exercises. Like if we're doing the jerk, we may substitute for 4 weeks with the jerk behind the neck. It's a little different movement. Same thing with the snatch. When they may be doing the full snatch, then we substitute it with the hang snatch or the power snatch. And it goes on and on. Front squats, back squats. We do step ups, single-legged squats, on and on.
And so it sounds like regardless of the sport that you play, the Hatch system is something that you believe can benefit any athlete regardless of
any athlete. One of my top proteges I haven't mentioned is Melissa Moore Seals. She's the women's strength coach at LSU, in charge of basketball and softball, and she's been to 2 Final Fours, World Series in softball, and this year came fairly close to almost winning it all for LSU in softball, and they've got a good shot next year. She uses the Hatch system for her basketball players and her softball player. I coached the volleyball girls team one year. We used the Hatch system for that. Skip Bergman, in 1996 and 1997, I had one of my proteges by the name of Kurt Hester in charge of the baseball team at LSU. And I told Skip, we can't baby these baseball players. They're athletes. They need to work hard. He said, all right, Coach, go ahead. And we did it. And they won back-to-back national championships. And they also set a home run record that I don't think will ever be broke.
So do you supplement the Hatch system with sport-specific movements, like movements that a basketball player or may need to actually use specific to their sport, and add that onto the Hatch system? Or
what's so great about the Olympic lifts? If you're talking about the power clean, it's just a perfect exercise for rebounders, okay? But the basketball players also have their on-court training that we do with them, where they're running different maneuvers on the court to supplement what we're doing on the platform. So we have a running and conditioning program in different drills with the basketball player, different drills with the softball players. But as far as the weightlifting itself, the basketball strength program, when they made the Final Four, was very much like the football strength program that won the first BCS national championship.
It's interesting. So in the weight room, the workouts are fairly similar, and you get more sports specific outside of the weight room around the conditioning. And
exactly right.
Okay. So I know we had Matt Bruce here a little while. He's still here, and you mentioned you started coaching him at 13.
I couldn't believe it went by that fast, but I started training Matt Bruce when he was 13 years of age, and he was easily one of the most dedicated athletes I ever trained. And 16 years later, at the age of 29, he retired. During that time, he made 7 world teams and 2 Olympic squads. And, when it's time for me to move on or retire, I have already designated Matt Bruce is going to be the head coach of the Gayle Hatch weightlifting team. And I expect him to carry it on for another 40 years, and then he should have some proteges coming up to carry it on and keep it going.
Well, we're gonna be talking to Matt one-on-one here, but I'm gonna try and get him into our conversation here in a minute as well. But before we do that, the fact that you started working with him at 13 prompted a question for me around just your philosophy around when someone should get involved from a youth perspective. What's the right age?
Well, we like to start with them around 12 or 13 years of age. You can start working with them when they're 8 and 9 with a broomstick, teaching them proper technique and having them doing push-ups and pull-ups and running forward and backward and drills. But there's a myth that goes around that, weightlifting will make you short. Well, no, it won't. Playing basketball didn't make Shaq 7'2". He went into basketball because he had the right height and frame to go into basketball, like Matt Bruce. he inherited his frame from his mother, and it is built. He has a perfect structure for a world-class Olympic weightlifter, so he chooses that sport instead of trying to be a 5'6" NBA center.
Right. Of course, you gotta. We all have certain physical abilities, right? You got to work with what you have.
I'll tell you what he can do. He's got a vertical jump of 43 inches.
Oh, wow.
Yes, he does. And so many of our lifters have those high vertical jumps, and that comes from the Olympic lifts. And so anytime I put on a clinic, I always finish up with Matt, showing him how high he could jump. And the crowd loves it because sometimes he gets up in the air and it looks like he's just stuck up there. And then he finally comes down to the floor, right.
Well, what do you think it is that makes some of your or all your proteges so successful when they move on and they're implementing the Hatch system themselves? And what are some of the intangibles that they have that makes them?
I think it all starts with discipline and structure. Everybody that comes in there, I have a talk with them and tell them that this is the way it's going to be. You know, I had a rule years ago that you couldn't wear earrings into the gym. I said, when you get outside the wall, you can put your earrings on, but in here, they're going to be off. And surprisingly, I never had not one single kid, black or white, ever complain about that. They just said, yes, sir. And I told one young man, I said, Warrick Dunn just signed a $40 million contract. I don't let him wear earrings in here. So I'm darn sure not going to let you wear earrings in here. But so it starts with discipline and structure and teaching about values and responsibilities. And there's no prima donna. Our star lifters will help the beginners. And it doesn't take much if they come in and see a Matt Bruce and he just says a couple of good words to him, say, young man, that's really looking good. Or slap on the back from a Tommy Calandro or a Brett Bryan. And so there's no prima donnas acting like they're a big deal. They're there to help, and it's all one team.
And is that something that you try and institute in the athletes that are training?
No question about that. That is exactly from day one. I started that attitude. It's going to be just like that, and it's paid off. We don't have any jerks in our program. They would last about 12 seconds, and I'd kick them out the door. So everything's pretty much yes, sir, and no, sir, and what's next? You know, that's what our Tommy Calandro, one of our Olympians, would give the advice to a young man. Say, look, just come in here and say to Coach Hatch, yes, sir, no, sir, what's next? And then give him 100%. If you give him 98%, you're going to hear from him. So you better give him 100% on every set, every exercise that you do, and you'll get along fine with Coach Hatch.
When you what's some of your advice that you would give to somebody who's either just starting out in this industry, in this, you know, from a career standpoint?
I think that a young strength coach today should read, get on the internet, get as much information that they can. And one of the things I do with my young strength coaches is teach them how to read, because there's a lot of junk out there, and I like for them to be able to recognize that, whoa, wait a minute. This is not, you know, let me check with Coach Hatch on this, and then I can tell him it's pure junk or there's something positive in there. And so that's important. And I have something like Tommy Moffatt. I can go back to him many, many years ago. To Tommy, anytime you got a question, 24 hours a day, pick up the phone and call me. I don't care what time it is. And boy, did he take me to heart. I mean, those first 5 years, he was calling me all the time, making sure he had this right, this right, this right. And I do that with the younger strength coaches, and that's very important to have that open line of communication with the guys you got at these different universities. And, you know, I know some Tiger fans might say, oh, good Lord, Coach, why are you letting him go to Alabama? I say, well, you know, they got to go on and spread their wings and create their own career. And instead of working for $35,000 here at LSU for assistant, over the period of time, they can make $300,000 at a major university. So
I've had an opportunity to talk to coaches like Tommy and Moffatt, and you know, I can tell now after talking to you where they get the concept and the idea of relationships matter,
Right.
and really being there not only for their coaches and their players, but I can tell that you're there for them, years after they leave under your wing. So
that's what I'm so proud about this banquet. I can't believe how many of them made their way down here, and there was a few that couldn't make it because they had practice on Friday and they had to stay there. Even like Vic can't get here, and he's in Florida, but he can't get off in time to get here for the banquet at 6 o'clock. So, but of course they call and let you know how proud and how thankful they are, and they're good solid guys.
I'm sure your phone's ringing off the hook. So,
It is.
Mr. Coach Hatch, thank you very much
Great,
for your
it's
time.
pleasure. Okay.
I really, really appreciate it.
We enjoyed it.
Coach Hatch will be receiving the Alvin Roy Career Lifetime Achievement Award tonight at the conference. So we're actually open. We'll be there and be able to stream that live as well. But Coach Hatch, again, thank you very much for your time, and we'll be talking to some more coaches soon.